Do you ever wish there was a rule book for life? Well, it turns out there is. Why don't you know about it? What's wrong with you? Today's
There's
video, we're
actually
going
a
to be
lot
talking
of them.
about the Bible. But today's video, we're going to be talking about what ancient wisdom got right about modern life. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's happening? That is the interesting thing though, is like there's a lot of text, right? I mean, there's all the religious text, so
But
there's
I don't
that.
like the rules they give us.
Yeah, well, right. They give you rules. There's all those. There's tons. I mean, there's tons of like great thinkers, sages, and all who have written works. But what's interesting though is that they're not all the same either. That's what I always find interesting about it. It's like it's not like there is one rule book. There's all these different interpretations of how to do it. There's a lot of overlap for sure, but there is no like one way.
And then even with the rule books, they're open to interpretation. Like that's what all the rabbis and everything do with the Old Testament and New Testament. All they do is just interpret the law.
Like wildly open to it in
Yeah,
some cases, right?
wildly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean there's philosophers we still don't even know really we still debate how to interpret them correctly. After all
Hmm.
this time. So and I think that's always the difficulty whenever you're reading these ancient thinkers and stuff, or ancient doctrines or texts or whatever, is you have to make it relevant to your life. So there's always going to be some layer of interpretation as you transport what they say to modern times. Because, things are a little different now than they were when, the Bible was written, or when, Plato wrote, the Republic, or Aristotle, his Nicomachean Ethics, right? Times have changed a bit. Maybe the human experience hasn't as much as we think it, like to think it has, but, by and large, life has changed, and that forces us to kind of interpret these things differently.
Yeah. And not only that, because it's not things aren't black and white. It's
You know,
very, it's like shades of gray. And like you look at the simple like Ten Commandments or whatever, thou shalt not kill.
I know, right?
But it's like, but what happens if it's somebody who's just like a serial murderer and they're going to kill you and your whole family? In that case, can you kill them
Well,
if it's self-defense?
do you know what's
It's
funny?
just,
There's this the doctrine of double effect, and it's basically I think it's I'm not feeling well still a little bit, so I'm a little off, but I think it's attributed to Aquinas was the guy who first came up
mhm.
with the argument. But basically, they were trying to argue because Christian theology, right? Like, you don't want to, you're not meant to like hurt anyone, kill anyone. But they came up with this question, well, what about self-defense? And the doctrine of double effect is like this rationalization, basically, for why you can use physical violence up to a point if you're threatened. Because,
Mm.
it kind of, I think most of us would say it's sort of absurd if, like, you can't protect yourself if you're being attacked. You're not starting
Mm.
it, but, yeah.
Yeah. But
So you get that.
some ancient philosophers would say, well, what is the self?
Yeah, right?
Buddha comes to mind. Yeah.
Buddha does
He
come
would.
to mind there.
Yeah. But
There is no
anyways, the
self.
topic today we're talking about ancient wisdom that got it right. Here's one thing that I think they got right. Could have been Epictetus, who said the dichotomy of control.
Oh, yeah.
There are things in your control, there are things out of your control. Focus on the things in your control, let go of the things out of your control. Things in your control, your judgments, your decisions, your actions, things out of control, pretty much everything in life.
Yeah. Yeah, in your control is literally like how you respond to things. Basically you.
Yeah.
Beyond that, no.
Yeah,
No, I
your
actually
thoughts,
really
beliefs, decisions, judgments, that
I
stuff.
love that one actually, and I think like the Enchiridion, his handbook is really great because it's one of the I think it's one of
It's
those ancient
short and
texts
easy to
where I
read.
was gonna say it's short and it's the way it's written. You don't have to read it in order. You can read like any section you want at a time, so you can kind of like dip in and dip out of it, which is nice because it makes it easier to kind of engage with it. I think
Dude,
sometimes.
and it's like, you're talking about this, and I'm like, how come we had to pour over like Canterbury Tales and Scarlet Letter and freaking all these garbage
I don't
books in
know.
school? Why couldn't they just have been like, here's the meditations, here's the Enchiridion, here's the Tao Te Ching. Let's see what we can learn from this stuff.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, wouldn't it have? I mean, that would have
Yeah.
actually been nice to go through. I know. I
Hmm.
think you're lucky if you like read like the Allegory of the Cave excerpt from the Republic in high school or something,
Hmm.
And
Yeah, it
it's kind
never
of a
happened.
shame we don't expose people to it early enough where it would help them. Because I think that's one of the things I think ancient wisdom does get right in the modern world is that the emphasis on critical thinking. Like forget, I think that's one of the things you learn from philosophy is forget the actual, like if you forget about all the actual positions they're arguing at first, the most important thing they're arguing is to keep critically thinking about life and reflecting on life and thinking about yourself and your situation and never stop that engagement with yourself in reality, where it's a critical analysis and thoughtful. Never take it for granted, you know? And I think that's something
Mhm.
they got really right that we've kind of lost. I mean, it's almost crazy, but now it seems like people want things more black and white now than ever. It's insane. Like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Absolutely. Here's another thing they got right. Simplicity. So I think it was Tao Te Ching. They say like I'm teaching you three things: simplicity, patience, and something else, maybe compassion or something like that.
sounds very
But
damaging. Yeah.
yeah, and but simplicity, they got that right because we complicate stuff so much when it can be simple, and especially just like with all these different social media and all this blah 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 blah, like just talking heads and all this different stuff, and just kind of simplifying and removing most of it.
Well, I think that's interesting because like I'm sure, back in the day, I'm sure there was social pressure just like there is today, like to an extent, right? Like, you worried about how your neighbors thought of you or, whatever, your community and all. But it's like it is so much worse today because it's not just your community. Your community is like 80 times or magnitude larger than they were, but also it's like the entire world, right? Because it's social media likes, it's this and that. It's being, it's you could be videotaped by anyone. It's the talking heads on TV telling you how to think. Like there's just advertising everywhere. Like I feel like
Mhm.
we really are kind of suffer there, where it's really hard to almost like have your own thoughts without this outside influence constantly being, you know, pressed against it and forcing them out.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the future of deepfakes and AI is going to make people pay attention less to all of it because when you can't tell what's real and what's
Yeah.
fake, do you just ignore all of it or people just believe everything?
I don't know because it kind of looks like they believe everything and that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hope that changes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it is kind of insane when you think about it. We're like, you know, so much of the stuff, information that's out there isn't even real information. It's totally just like an opinion about something. And, you know, man, it is hard. And it's hard to separate out, I think. It's also hard to get, I think it's, because I even find myself thinking this sometimes. And I remember particularly like I remember my dad struggled with this a lot where like, he used to watch the news. I remember watching with him. It was on twice a day for 30 minutes, right? And like generally it was, more or less factual because they didn't have a lot of time.
And
And
it was a
so,
lot of local stuff and the
yeah.
occasional national thing,
Well,
and
and the
you would never
national
hear
stuff,
anything international.
yeah, and the national stuff was, if you heard anything international, it's something huge, one,
Yeah.
and it was like the facts. There wasn't opinions about it. And then we moved to that 24-hour news cycle, but for him, because his engagement with the news was always like that, he thought that, well, they're putting it on TV, right? It must be true to some extent, right? Or they wouldn't put it on there. And I think that sort of like kind of thinking is hard to break too, you know? And that's why I think that philosophy gets it right, right? Is this constant critical thinking and forcing ourselves to question the things we're faced with so that we don't get caught in that trap of
Mhm.
believing everything or taking things for granted.
Anything else that
I
ancient
mean,
wisdom got right?
a lot. Yeah. What's funny? I always laugh because like I always will see like these, you'll see these articles or new psychological theories come out and stuff. And it's like you can like trace it back to philosophers who said, now granted, they didn't do any studies or anything, but it was already there present, and it's kind of funny when you see that. So I think we are finding a lot like of what we're learning about psychology and stuff the philosophers are already on that path. I think Nietzsche got a lot of stuff right about psychology. He got a lot wrong too, but he was very much, I think going in that direction of really thinking about how our mind works and stuff and trying to understand that and how that influences our experience. So I think he got that right in a very interesting way. Yeah,
Mm. Oh, here's another thing that they got right. I know it's not the dude who said Descartes who said I think therefore I am, but
he did say
is
that.
I know he said that, but
Oh,
this is not what I'm getting at. It's
okay.
you think the way you feel, or you feel the way you think. How you
Okay.
think dictates how you feel. And this is something that I think uh is very important for nowadays when people, a lot of people are anxious and depressed because what they may not realize is that they're having anxious or depressed thoughts, and that's what's making them anxious and depressed.
Yeah.
And so, you know, kind of in a nutshell, anxious thoughts are things where you think harm is coming to you, and depressed thoughts are ones where you think you lost something important to you. And I mean, they can go a lot deeper than that, but that's like an old philosophy where you feel the way you think. And I think is very true about nowadays, but people just don't realize it because most people don't see what they're thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think that goes with like the existential, the existential dread and crises, like the existentialists talked about. I think that's very much, what we experience with anxiety and depression today, right? That hopelessness, that loss of meaning, all of that struggling with like understanding our place in the world and the world feeling like, nothing makes sense anymore. Like I think that's all there. And I think you're right too to point that out that, it is our thoughts are so closely linked to how we feel and vice versa. There is no separation. I think is also interesting too that like, a lot of philosophers do talk about, and I'm not gonna, I guess, mention anyone in particular here, but like also how we value these experiences. Like, why is it that we immediately think of like things like depression, anxiety as negative? Or why do we immediately think of suffering and challenges and obstacles as negative? That could be flipped. There's no reason why you can't flip that to something positive too.
That is a brilliant point because, like depression and anxiety come about, they say something very important about you. Like they say that you have some good values and stuff like that. Because if you weren't depressed, it would mean that whatever's going on is all right with you.
Yeah.
And generally, like I can look back at times when I was depressed in my life, it was because stuff wasn't going the way that I wanted it, and I just felt hopeless about it.
Oh hell yeah, right?
And
And like it's also a motivation to change. Like I remember like looking back when I was like at my most depressed, like it was because like things weren't right in my life and you need to fix them. And
Mhm.
it's like your body's telling you as clear
But
as
it
it
says,
can.
but like what you said, it says something very good about you. Like you actually care that much about your life that you want things
Yeah.
to be different.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you would just be like, well, my life just sucks and it's a turd, but hey, let's keep on going.
Let's just keep rolling with this. It is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny that we have this concept of norm and we always are so quick to evaluate everything that deviates from that as negative, but there's no real reason to make it an evaluation like that. Yeah.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah.
it was Epicurus that said, I think it was him that said, it's hot by convention, cold by convention, sweet by convention, But basically his point was like, all these ideas that we have about like the valuation of things or like what things mean, it's just convention. It's just like, a construct that we've agreed upon that we think it's this way. I think that's
Hmm.
something they got right too.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And in the Tao Te Ching, they talk about how these things create each other. Like happiness and sadness create each other because one cannot exist without the other.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's just degrees, right? I mean, they're connected to each other. The happy person is just the extreme of the sad person in a sense, and vice versa. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's a good point.
So there you have it. In
There's a
case you
few
thought there was
things.
no rule book for life, we just found a whole bunch of things that they got right. And yeah, there you have it. What the ancients got right about modern life. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. Until next time, I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.